On June 9th, 2025, the United States announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. The White House called it a diplomatic breakthrough. Secretary of State Marco Rubio used the word historic. Within 24 hours, Iranian state media released a statement that most Western analysts filed under routine posturing. I want you to hold on to that statement because by the end of this video, it will look like something entirely different. It will look like a strategic inventory report delivered in plain sight. Here is what Iran said. Iran said its nuclear program is more advanced than at any point in the Islamic Republic's history. Not continuing, not protected, advanced, past tense of advancement. The program did not survive the strikes. It was not merely preserved. According to Tehran, the strikes accelerated a condition, and the ceasefire, the instrument Washington celebrated as a win, was the moment Iran chose to say so out loud. These two narratives cannot both be true. America cannot have degraded Iran's nuclear capability through 12 days of strikes and simultaneously have Iran emerge from those strikes announcing its most advanced nuclear posture in 46 years. One of these claims is correct. The other is a story Washington told itself to justify stopping. I am going to spend the next 25 minutes showing you which is which, and I am going to show you exactly why the analytical tools America brought to this confrontation were always going to produce this outcome. This is not a story about the ceasefire. This is a case study in the most consequential recurring failure in American strategic thinking. The assumption that military action is a solution to a knowledge problem, when in reality, the knowledge problem is why the military action happened at all. Let me give you the framework first, because without it, the evidence will look like isolated events instead of a system. There is a concept in strategic intelligence called the count problem. It is deceptively simple. When you do not know how many of something an adversary has, and you strike what you can see, you have not solved the problem. You have revealed to the adversary exactly what you can see. Every target you hit is a data point you hand to your opponent about the limits of your surveillance architecture. They now know which facilities were visible to your satellites, which supply chains you could trace, which engineers appeared in your signal's intercepts. The targets you missed, and there are always targets you missed, those are now the most valuable assets in their arsenal, because they are the ones you proved you cannot find. America has run this calculation before. It ran it in Iraq in 1991. The Gulf War bomb damage assessments after Desert Storm concluded that coalition air power had eliminated the majority of Iraq's WMD infrastructure. The Defense Intelligence Agency believed it. The CIA believed it. The UN believed it for years. It was not until after 2003, when inspectors had physical access to the entire country, that the full picture became clear, and even then the picture remained contested. The lesson that should have been extracted from that experience was not, our targeting was insufficient. The lesson was, kinetic action against a concealed program produces confident-sounding assessments that are structurally unreliable. You cannot bomb your way to certainty about what you have not already found. Iran watched that lesson being taught in real time for 3 decades. And unlike the countries that received American military attention in that period, Iran had the institutional memory, the technical depth, and the strategic patience to internalize it. Now, here is what no one is measuring inside the mainstream ceasefire coverage. The question everyone in Washington is asking right now is, how much damage did we do? That is the wrong question. It was always the wrong question. The right question is, what did Iran learn about American targeting capability during those 12 days that it did not know before? And the answer to that question is worth more to Tehran than any uranium centrifuge America managed to destroy. Let me show you how this works operationally, because the theory only matters when you can see it in the evidence. Between April and June 2025, the United States and Israel conducted what was described as the most sophisticated coordinated strike campaign against nuclear infrastructure in the history of modern warfare. B-2 Spirit bombers were deployed. Bunker-busting munitions specifically developed for hardened underground facilities were used. The strikes targeted Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. American officials told congressional briefings that Fordo had been rendered inoperable. The word inoperable appeared in multiple classified and unclassified assessments that were subsequently leaked or summarized for the press. Hold on to the word inoperable, because inoperable is a status assessment, not a permanent condition. Inoperable means, as of the date of our last surveillance pass, this facility cannot perform its primary function. Inoperable does not mean destroyed. It does not mean the personnel have dispersed. It does not mean the program has ended. It means the physical structure that was visible in your targeting database has been made non-functional, which is different from saying the program it housed has been terminated. Iran has been building distributed nuclear infrastructure since 2003. That is not a theory. That is a documented pattern in every IAEA safeguards report issued since the Natanz facility was first disclosed by an opposition group, not by American intelligence, not by Israeli intelligence, but by an Iranian dissident organization that chose to make the information public. That disclosure in 2002 should have reset every assumption in the American intelligence architecture about what Iran had declared versus what Iran had not declared. It did not. The structural assumption that Iran's nuclear footprint was legible to American surveillance survived that revelation and kept surviving it through every subsequent surprise, every subsequent undeclared facility, every subsequent enrichment escalation that appeared in IAEA quarterly reports before appearing in American strategic planning documents. Now we arrive at June 2025, 12 days of strikes, ceasefire declared. And within 24 hours, Iran issues a statement about the most advanced status of its nuclear program in history. What is the strategic logic of making that statement at that exact moment? Think about this carefully, because the timing is the argument. If Iran's program had been genuinely degraded, silence would be the rational response. You do not announce weakness. You do not invite further strikes by telling the adversary you have been wounded. Silence would have served Iran's interests if the strikes had been strategically significant. Iran did not stay silent. Iran made a specific affirmative claim about advancement. That means one of two things is true. Either the claim is a bluff, in which case it is a bluff Iran believes it can sustain without immediate falsification, meaning Iran is confident that America cannot currently verify the falsity of the claim, which itself is a strategic signal about the limits of American surveillance. Or the claim is true, in which case Iran is advertising that it possesses a nuclear posture more advanced than the one America just spent 12 days and an unknown number of billions of dollars trying to degrade. Neither option is good for Washington. In the first case, America cannot call the bluff because calling the bluff requires intelligence certainty it has demonstrated it does not have. In the second case, America has conducted a military campaign that may have destroyed visible infrastructure while leaving the core capability intact or enhanced. Both of these outcomes flow directly from the same structural failure I described earlier, the count problem. You cannot degrade what you have not found, and you cannot know what you have not found unless the adversary tells you. Iran just told you. That is what the statement was. It was a controlled disclosure, a deliberate publication of a status update at the moment of maximum American vulnerability, when Washington was celebrating a ceasefire and could not respond militarily without destroying the diplomatic architecture it had just spent 12 days building a justification to create. This is the North Korea model, and I need you to understand this comparison with precision because it is not a metaphor. It is a template that Iran studied and executed. North Korea's nuclear program survived the Clinton administration's near-strike scenario in 1994. It survived the agreed framework. It survived the Bush administration's axis of evil designation and the subsequent period of pressure. It survived the Obama administration's strategic patience doctrine. And in each of those phases, what North Korea was doing was not defying American pressure. It was using American pressure as a forcing function to accelerate the program while the negotiations created the time and space to do so. By the time North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in 2006, the question of whether to strike the program had already been answered by the program itself. Striking a confirmed nuclear-armed state creates escalation mathematics that non-nuclear states do not generate. North Korea crossed that threshold before America could act, and it did so specifically because it understood the window of American willingness to act was closing as the program matured. Iran watched that sequence with extraordinary attention. Iranian strategic planners did not need to invent a model for surviving American military pressure while advancing a nuclear program. The model was demonstrated in real time on the Korean Peninsula over a 30-year period. What Iran added to the model was a more sophisticated concealment architecture, a more dispersed industrial base, and a more nuanced diplomatic posture that maintained just enough international legitimacy to complicate any clean strike authorization. And here is the element of the North Korea model that the ceasefire statement now confirms Iran has reached. The announcement of advancement is not made when the program is vulnerable. It is made when the program has crossed a threshold that makes the strategic calculus for American action permanently more complicated. North Korea announced its nuclear capability after crossing that threshold. Iran just announced its most advanced nuclear posture in history from the other side of a ceasefire that America sponsored, initiated, and celebrated. The timing is not incidental. The timing is the message. Now I want to go to the second layer of this, because there is an implication buried in that statement that almost no Western outlet has pulled out and examined directly. When Iran says the program is more advanced than at any point in history, that claim has to be situated against the baseline of what was known. The IAEA, in its February 2025 quarterly report, assessed that Iran had enriched enough uranium to 60% purity, that if further enriched to 90% weapons grade, it could theoretically produce fissile material sufficient for multiple devices. The February report was not a breaking revelation. It was the continuation of a trajectory that had been documented in consecutive quarters. The strikes in June 2025 targeted the enrichment facilities that appeared in that documented trajectory. If those strikes successfully destroyed the declared and surveilled enrichment capacity, the baseline for Iran's program should now be lower than the February 2025 assessment, not higher. For the program to be at its most advanced status in history as of June 9, 2025, one of the following conditions must be true. First, the undeclared enrichment capacity exceeded the declared and surveilled capacity to such a degree that destroying the visible facilities did not reduce the aggregate program capability. Second, Iran had pre-positioned fissile material or enrichment capacity in locations that were not in the American or Israeli targeting database, meaning the entire strike campaign was conducted against a partial picture of the program. Or third, the advancement Iran is referencing is not enrichment volume, but weaponization architecture, warhead design, delivery integration, or another dimension of the nuclear program that was never the primary focus of the strike campaign. Any one of these three conditions represents a catastrophic intelligence failure. Not a targeting failure, not an operational failure, but an intelligence failure. A failure of the underlying framework through which American analysts interpreted Iran's nuclear program over the past decade. Here is what no one is measuring inside the ceasefire celebration. The strike campaign was authorized, designed, and executed based on a targeting list. That targeting list was built from a surveillance picture. The surveillance picture was comprehensive enough to authorize a campaign involving B-2 bombers and bunker-busting munitions. But a surveillance picture that misses the full scope of an adversary's program is not a surveillance picture. It is a selection of what the adversary allowed to be visible. And if Iran managed the visibility of its program, which the post-ceasefire statement now strongly suggests, then the strikes that America conducted were not a strategic degradation of Iran's nuclear capability. They were a controlled demolition of the facilities Iran was willing to sacrifice to learn what America could see. This is the McNamara fallacy in its most dangerous modern instantiation. Robert McNamara's fallacy, articulated in the context of Vietnam, was the tendency to measure what was measurable and treat the measurable as a comprehensive account of reality. Body counts were measurable. Territory held was measurable. Bomb damage assessments were measurable. Strategic will, institutional knowledge, dispersed capability, and the adversary's willingness to absorb visible losses in exchange for invisible gains were not easily measurable, and so they were systematically underweighted in American strategic assessment. The Iran strike campaign measured the facilities it could identify and strike. It declared success on those metrics, and it did not adequately account for the possibility that the adversary had designed its program around the anticipated limits of American measurement. Iran did not make America's surveillance architecture fail. Iran worked within it. Iran let America see what America was looking for, and it moved the decisive elements of the program outside the frame of American observation long enough for the campaign to be run against the decoy infrastructure. And now, having absorbed the strikes, Iran tells you the program is more advanced than ever, from behind a ceasefire that American diplomacy sponsored. At a moment when any American response would shatter the diplomatic framework Washington just spent enormous political capital constructing. The trap is not that Iran survived the strikes. States survive strikes. The trap is that America created the diplomatic and strategic conditions under which Iran could make this announcement without facing an immediate consequence. And America created those conditions because it believed its own damage assessments. So what do you watch for now? I want to give you 3 concrete indicators over the next 60 to 90 days that will tell you whether the post-ceasefire strategic balance is stabilizing or accelerating toward a second, more dangerous phase. The first indicator is the IAEA inspection access negotiation. Iran has consistently used IAEA access as a pressure valve, granting limited access when under maximum coercive pressure and restricting access when leverage diminishes. Watch whether Iran in the post-ceasefire environment pushes for modified inspection protocols, access limitations justified by security concerns at damaged facilities, or extended timelines before inspections can resume at sites subject to the strikes. Any restriction of IAEA access in the post-ceasefire period is not a procedural dispute, it is a program protection interval. The second indicator is whether the United States publishes a formal bomb damage assessment, and if so, what language it uses. If the assessment uses inoperable and degraded without quantifying the reduction in enrichment capacity relative to the February 2025 IAEA baseline, that language gap is the tell. An honest assessment of a genuinely successful degradation campaign can be quantitative. It can say, Iran's known enrichment capacity is now X% of what it was in February. If the assessment is qualitative, if it uses process language rather than output language, that is the intelligence community managing the distance between what was struck and what was destroyed. The third indicator is the most important and the least likely to appear in mainstream coverage. Watch Iranian diplomatic engagement with China and Russia over the next 60 days. If Iran's program has been genuinely set back, Iran's leverage in negotiations with Beijing and Moscow is temporarily reduced. China and Russia deal with Iran based on Iran's strategic utility, and a weakened Iran is a less valuable partner. If Iran's post-ceasefire engagement with China and Russia intensifies rather than diminishes, if there are infrastructure investment announcements, energy deals, or defense cooperation signals, those are Iran advertising to its strategic partners that it remains a capable actor worth investing in. That would be consistent with the ceasefire statement about advancement, not with American damage assessments. I want to leave you with one primary document homework assignment before I close. The IAEA Board of Governors meeting report from February 2025 is publicly available on the IAEA website. Read specifically the section on Iran's enriched uranium stockpile and the trajectory of 60% enrichment. Then compare it to the IAEA statement issued after the ceasefire, when and if one is published. If the post-ceasefire IAEA language does not show a quantified reduction in stockpile or capacity, you now know exactly what that means. You do not need a cable news commentator to interpret it for you. The deeper question I want to leave you with is this. If the count problem is structural, if the architecture of American intelligence collection is systematically more visible to adversaries than American planners assume, then the Iran nuclear case is not an exception. It is a precedent. Taiwan is watching. North Korea is watching. Every state that possesses capabilities it wants to preserve from American military action is updating its doctrine based on what just happened in the 12 days between June and the ceasefire. The lesson they are drawing is not conceal your program. The lesson is let America see the parts you can afford to lose, absorb the strikes, and then announce your advancement from behind a diplomatic framework America built for you. That is a doctrine, and it is now documented in public, in Iran's own words, within 24 hours of the ceasefire America called historic. I will be continuing this analysis in the next video as the IAEA inspection access negotiations develop. If you think I have misread the evidence, if you think there is a version of the bomb damage assessment that explains the ceasefire statement without requiring an intelligence failure, I genuinely want to hear that argument in the comments. Show me the numbers that make the advancement claim and the degradation claim simultaneously true. That is the analytical homework. I will see you in the next one.